Hello and welcome. Guess it'll take a few minutes for people to join in. So we'll give people a minute. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's a very special day today. My name is Wendy Harris. I am the president and CEO of Catalyst Plus. And today we're officially launching our reconciliation action plan, Miuwitsitoen, which is a Cree word that means walking together in a good way. So we can go to the next slide. Just before I introduce you to my fellow panelists, I wanted to thank, I know we've got people joining us from all around the world, and I want to thank all of you for making the time to do that. I know some of you are up very, very late, or maybe it's very early, depending on your perspective. And so I just really wanted to say a special thank you. So my fellow panelists, I'm very excited. We have Suzanne Brunel here with us today. She's elected senator of the Toronto and York Region Métis Council and a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario. We have Laureen White, who is the chair of our Indigenous and Northern Services Committee on our board of directors. Alan Clark, member of the committee and member of our board of directors. And Stacia Keane, the director and lead of our Indigenous and Northern Services practice. So today we will begin and end with a prayer, and we'll make sure towards the end of the session that we have lots of time for questions and answers. So you can enter your questions in the little Q&A box at the bottom throughout, so you don't have to wait for the Q&A session, so you can ask questions anytime. We'll go to the next slide. As many of you know, Catalyst Plus has partnered with Indigenous governments, businesses, and communities for decades. So working in partnership with Indigenous clients to build stronger economies and better lives is not new. Our reconciliation action plan, however, is a new beginning. Our RAP is a clear, specific, multi-year commitment to do more, do better, and go deeper. And I'm so pleased to share the details of our reconciliation action plan with you today. Now I'd like to turn things over to Laureen to start today's journey of sharing our plan of walking and working together with Indigenous clients and partners towards shared goals. So over to you, Laureen.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. In the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect, we recognize that our work takes place on many traditional Indigenous territories across Canada and globally, where we help build stronger economies for better lives. We welcome everyone to the launch of our Reconciliation Action Plan, Miuwitsitoen, Walking Together in a Good Way. Developing this plan and now launching it helps guide our ongoing reconciliation journey with sincerity and responsibility in every aspect of our work. Over the next hour, we will be honored with an opening prayer led by Elder Suzanne Brunel, followed by words from leaders in our organization and an opportunity for you to ask questions and take away actionable steps. So I'm going to introduce Elder Brunel. She is, as Wendy had mentioned, she is a Métis with Menominee, French, and Irish roots. She is Toronto and York Region Métis Councillor, Senator, and Knowledge Seeker, and she traces her line to the Red River Valley. Suzanne was raised in the farming community of LaFontaine, Ontario, where she developed a strong connection to Mother Earth and all her relations. After graduating from York University's Glendon College, she dedicated over 40 years to federal public service, and she now serves on several municipal and Indigenous boards, working relentlessly in support of the Métis community. She works also in her spare time, which I'm wondering what spare time she has, given her impressive bio. In her time, she provides support and guidance to the Community Ethics Network, which is a membership-funded, not-for-profit corporation of over 50 community health and support sector organizations. So I would like now to turn it over to Elder Brunel.
Merci, Lauren. Tanzi, bonjour. Now, I started this day, as I do every day, by laying tobacco on the east side of my cedar trees. And I repeated this ceremony a few minutes ago before joining this webinar. An elder guided me to engage in this ceremony earlier this year. Tobacco, SEMA, opens the communication channels, and I lay it down with intent. What I included in today's are good intentions for today's event and respect for our time together, as well as prayers for the reconciliation journey to which Catalyst Plus is committed. J'ai mis du tabac sur la terre et maintenant la prière. We start in a good way by welcoming Creator and the ancestors to this circle. De plus, on rend hommage aux enfants d'hier, d'aujourd'hui et de demain. On reconnaît les anciens, on embrasse toute la communauté. We offer prayers for a better future built on a foundation of truth. We offer prayers for the continued healing of individuals, homes, communities, workplaces, and professions. We offer gratitude for guiding all who contributed to Catalyst Plus's reconciliation journey. And in the spirit of nothing about us without us, we offer gratitude for the values that honor and respect Indigenous peoples' self-determination and that place them at the heart of the decision-making. Creator, we're grateful for this day and all with which we are gifted on this day: the air, the sun, the cleansing rain, the wind, our lives, our breath, our freedoms, and each other, and our individual and collective voices, powerful voices we can use to advocate for a better tomorrow. On exprime notre gratitude à vous, Créateurs, pour avoir joint notre cercle, et aux ancêtres pour les avis et la sagesse que vous offrez du monde des esprits au nôtre. On honore tous nos ancêtres, dont les triomphes et les épreuves ont conduit là où nous sommes et qui nous sommes aujourd'hui. Merci for the values you passed on to us and that guide our day-to-day lives, our relationships, and our work. Merci, Créateur, pour toutes les bénédictions, pour la force et la détermination dont tu bénis les membres du cercle du Catalyst. Merci, Miigwech. Thank you. And back to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. So a little background on Catalyst Plus before we dig into the Reconciliation Action Plan. So we are a Canadian international economic development organization, and we've worked for over 55 years to build better lives by strengthening local economies in Canada and developing countries around the world. We believe that stronger economies lead to better, more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable economic and social progress. In other words, or in Wab Kinu's words, we believe the economic horse pulls the social cart. Some of you may know us by our original name, CESO, Canadian Executive Service Organization. We rebranded about a year and a half ago to better reflect what we do, to better reflect our mission to build capacity, to drive locally driven, inclusive growth and sustainable development. So our mission is to catalyze positive change. Where does this catalytic reaction come from? It comes from connecting our advisors, our Catalyst Plus advisors, with local and Indigenous clients in communities in Canada and over 30 countries around the world. Who are these advisors? Well, they're pretty special. They're senior level Canadian professionals who volunteer their knowledge and expertise to strengthen sustainable, inclusive businesses and to promote economic growth. But they aren't anyone. These advisors have worked for many, many years, and over that time have built their expertise. They're Canadians who want to be part of positive change. They want to learn from our clients, understand their needs and opportunities, as well as understanding the barriers they face to growth and progress. They want to work in partnership with them to reach their goals. So I mentioned that we work in over 30 countries around the world, in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and since the very beginning in Canada. So the question is our Reconciliation Action Plan relevant for our work outside of Canada, or is it strictly a Canadian matter? Well, we work with Indigenous clients around the world, so the answer is a wholehearted yes. Our work across the world honors our commitment to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. It's guided by our commitment to the principles of respect for Indigenous cultures and rights, and our work internationally is heavily influenced by our learning journey here in Canada. Our Reconciliation Action Plan is informed by the unique historical context in Canada and has been developed consultatively to address harmful legacies that continue to negatively impact Indigenous peoples here. We recognize that the terms reconciliation and Indigenous may not always carry the same meaning as in Canada. Nevertheless, the essence of our approach remains respect for the rights and voices of local ethnic groups and how they self-identify. Catalyst Plus embraces and seeks to continuously renew these guiding principles in all aspects of our relationships and partnerships with international ethnic communities. And we'll go over to Laureen with the next slide.
There we go. Sorry about that. Catalyst Plus recognizes that truth and reconciliation is a long and challenging journey. It's one we embark upon with determination and humility, but also with hope, creativity, and tenacity. We wholeheartedly support the principles and commitments of this Reconciliation Action Plan, and we're dedicated to its thorough implementation. We strive to be trustworthy, active ally with Indigenous peoples by working together to champion their rights, amplify their voices, foster cultural respect, and actively collaborate to dismantle barriers, promoting equity and empowerment. Creating this Reconciliation Action Plan is a crucial advancement in strengthening our capacity to act effectively and with integrity in this role. We're committed to leading by example, to educating our staff, stakeholders, and partners about the importance of truth and reconciliation. We will work tirelessly to ensure that the Reconciliation Action Plan and the actions we've committed to taking are more than just words on a page, but are lived realities in our organization and the communities we serve. We will work with our Indigenous partners in the implementation of this plan, and with their guidance, we will keep it evergreen. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lou Novmosky, who is our Catalyst Plus Board Chair.
Thank you, Laureen. Unfortunately, Lou was not able to join us today. So perhaps we'll just move on to the next section, the next slide, which is our core values. Alan, over to you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I just want to say on a personal level, and as a board member and volunteer advisor, as well as a First Nations person, I believe this project is an incredible step forward for the organization and our relationship with Indigenous people. Many organizations talk about their relationship with Indigenous people and their intent to improve it, but we're acting on our own intentions, and I think that's a very, very important step for us. The values, which we have described as awareness, inclusion, and economic independence, are at the heart of the Reconciliation Action Plan. They will guide everything that we do with Indigenous people at home and abroad. And our actions will be guided by the spirit of these values. And as you will see later in our action plan, our concrete actions that we intend to commit ourselves to are very much informed by these principles. Thank you.
Over to Safa.
Thank you, Alan. We're really, again, honored to share in more detail some of the actions that we've identified through extensive conversations, discussions with our Indigenous partners, clients, our staff, our board, our supporters. So that the actions that we're sharing with you today come from a long journey that we've undertaken to make sure that these actions are reflective of the people that we work most closely with and are those too that we can fully commit to taking. So I'll walk us through some actions associated with each of those areas that Alan just spoke about, including awareness, inclusion, and economic independence. So some of the actions that we've identified to promote and action the value that we have around awareness are really about using the platforms and the structures that we have in place and the people that we work with to share, promote, encourage, and really, I think, role model understanding and awareness of and the value and recognition of Indigenous cultures, histories, knowledge, and rights. We will do this as we have done and will continue to do very intentionally through the engagement of our staff, volunteers, and advisors in the careful and deliberate delivery of the Reconciliation Action Plan. We will make sure that in each of our actions, we're observing cultural protocols and offering land acknowledgements. We will promote anti-racism through the adoption of anti-oppression policies, practices, and education. Through the work that we do in marketing and communication, we will very intentionally use these platforms to elevate Indigenous voices in all of our Catalyst Plus communication materials. And we will also, again, intentionally and strategically foster awareness of political and social landscapes and different frameworks for reconciliation and Indigenous engagement in other countries where Catalyst Plus is active. In the Reconciliation Action Plan in full that we'll be sharing following, you'll be able to also see in this, as well as in the other action items I'll be sharing, the full plan and timeline and detail that accompanies each of these commitments. On the next slide, please. Thank you. So the next piece that we want to focus on is inclusion. So inclusion looks like, how do we make sure that the way we do our work, the places where we do the work, and the people who do the work that we do at Catalyst Plus are reflective of the Indigenous peoples that we want to work with and do through our programs. So the way that we plan to do this, again, through specific actions, is engaging broadly with Indigenous peoples, as we have done to develop our programs and to develop this Reconciliation Action Plan, and to structure and embed these conversations into how we design and deliver all of the programs that we do within Catalyst Plus. It will look like recruiting Indigenous staff, volunteers, and board members, seeking ongoing advice from our Indigenous partner organizations on the delivery of our Reconciliation Action Plan. Again, we're looking at how we intentionally communicate the principles set out in this plan and do so broadly, reporting transparently on our results and engaging with our broad community in reviewing our practices. It will also be physically in our building designs and our office spaces and those places where we do our work that we acknowledge Indigenous culture. This can be through artwork, spaces to support congregation and Indigenous practices, as well as very specifically ventilation to support smudging. We will also make sure that our policies and practices address the interests of our Indigenous clients, and that these policies and practices inform and contribute to an organizational culture that attracts and prioritizes greater diversity, again, amongst our staff and board to include the importance of Indigenous voices and representations to inform the work that we do. Next slide, please. In the third pillar of our Reconciliation Action Plan, we very thoughtfully look towards how each of our programs and how we do our work, where we do our work, is contributing meaningfully to the economic independence of the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples that we work with. So the actions that we will take to foster this and to deliver this work: one, to procure goods and services from Indigenous businesses; two, in providing economic development tools and services to and with Indigenous clients, and using these tools and developing these tools in a way that demonstrates an understanding and respect for Indigenous practice, including respect for lands, resources, and the environment. And we will continue to work tirelessly through our staff, through our board, through our volunteers, to improve access and remove barriers that are related to Indigenous peoples, communities, and organizations' access to economic independence. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Stacia. So now just a couple of words on governance and accountability. As we mentioned, the launch of our Reconciliation Action Plan is the beginning. And Stacia mentioned, many concrete things we'd like to focus on going forward. So we put together a plan to ensure that we are governing the execution of the plan effectively. So I'd just like to mention four. The first is we're committed to maintaining an effective steering committee to ensure there's strong governance and accountability over the RAP. We're committed to providing appropriate support for effective implementation of RAP commitments. We're committed to building accountability and transparency through reporting not only RAP achievements, but also challenges and learnings, both internally and externally. And we're committed to continuing our reconciliation journey by reviewing and renewing our RAP every 3 years. So now we can go to the next slide, and this is the opportunity for dialogue, a little Q&A. So I will facilitate this. First question is, were Indigenous people consulted in the preparation of the RAP? What was the process? Who did you engage? Were Indigenous people involved?
It's Wendy. I can answer that question. Indigenous peoples were involved, consulted, part of from the very beginning. So some of the ways that we've done this: one is the involvement of our Indigenous and Northern Services Board Committee, which is made up of our board members who are themselves First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, was carefully involved in the development of the project. We also early on engaged the support of Indigenous community engagement. So this is really a thriving, incredibly valuable to us business in Northern Ontario, led by Michael Fox, owned by Michael Fox and his incredible team, who worked with us to host focus groups, surveys, facilitate conversations with both our Indigenous partners, our clients, leaders, as well as our staff and our volunteers internally. So the result that we have with our Reconciliation Action Plan is the culmination of I would say, almost hundreds of conversations and surveys and responses and focus groups, again, where we ask those questions from our First Nation, Inuit clients and partners, as well as our First Nations and Inuit Métis staff and volunteers and board members, to provide their advice and what they think would be most important as priorities for us to focus on, both in the priorities and then how we would deliver the plan.
Great, thank you, Stacia. Okay, so we've got a question sort of related to our work internationally. With the RAP being extended and integrated into Catalyst Plus relations and practice working into the many countries it works that have been impacted by colonialism. I'm not sure what the question is, but maybe we can talk about how the RAP informs or influences our international projects.
So I think that it will do this in a few really important ways. So going back to those 3 pillars that will guide the work that we do in terms of awareness, inclusion, and economic independence, the volunteers that we engage with and recruit, the staff, our leadership, through the process of developing the Reconciliation Action Plan, and as a result of the actions that we will be implementing through it, will ensure that the actions and programs we develop are embedded within knowledge, values, and practices that are reflective of an Indigenous worldview, and those that are most applicable within the local context that we work with internationally. I think the other piece is that this process of developing the Reconciliation Action Plan has in and of itself provided invaluable understanding and awareness for our staff in Canada and internationally with regards to how to do that and how to engage, how to design a project and how to implement a project that is truly respectful and reflective of the people that we are working with. And particularly in our work internationally, we have worked with Indigenous governments, businesses, and nations throughout the projects that we do internationally. And with this RAP, we can do so even more intentionally. And again, from the very beginning of how we do that work, ensure that the awareness and inclusion and economic development aspects of that are paramount and that we know how to implement and embed those.
Thank you, Stacia. So we've got an interesting one here about the Truth and Reconciliation TRC's calls to action. So is the RAP incorporating any of the Truth and Reconciliation 48 calls to action?
Absolutely. So this Reconciliation Action Plan is specifically responding to Call 92, which is calling on business and the corporate world to respond and embed practices and policies that are reflective of the principles of reconciliation as it relates to how we do the work, how you procure services, how you incorporate and diversify staff. So we've been intentional in developing the Reconciliation Action Plan that it responds to and reflects Call 92's call to action, as well as other very important pieces of policy, legislation, practice that include UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the National Indigenous Economic Strategy that was released and led in part with Alan Clark, who we were very fortunate to work with on this Reconciliation Action Plan as well as those calls from the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So we were careful to really, again, consider and make sure that our actions respond and implement actions in response to those calls to action.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacia. Now the questions are rolling in, so I'll try and keep track. So we've got an interesting one about measurement. How will you measure the success of your plan? And then a note, thank you for your work on this important issue. So it's a great question. We've got those targets. Any thoughts on that?
So within the full document of our Reconciliation Action Plan, within each of the action items that we've shared with you today, you'll see in that plan that we have set very measurable quantitative targets for ourselves in order to carefully and measure our progress in a very transparent way. So as part of our review process, when developing the plan, we shared the plan with experts on our board and external stakeholders whose whole world involves measuring and evaluation. So we made sure to include their feedback in how we structured that piece, because what we heard when we were speaking with some of our First Nations partners. What I heard was a reconciliation action plan is great. The most important part is that you make sure you do it, and you make sure that the actions are doable, and that you can do it. So it's been important for us from the beginning to make sure that those metrics are there. So again, when we share the full document, you'll be able to see clearly in terms of what the quantitative measurements are that we'll be holding ourselves accountable to, as well as a timeline for delivery.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So next one is about new projects. Will the action plan lead to any new projects with Indigenous communities?
That's a great question.
Great question.
So I think if I was going to reflect on that, I think it already has. I think that in my perspective from leading this work that we've done, it was in doing the reconciliation action plan that we really saw that shift in awareness, understanding, inclusion, even within our organization and practices that we thought already were. It was a learning experience that already has been reflected in some of the programs. I think one of the ones I could share most imminently would be the real feedback we heard from some of our Indigenous partners in terms of amplifying and elevating Indigenous voices. I heard that in many of the conversations that we had. And in terms of elevating Indigenous voices in a way that talks about the strengths, the meaning, the learning, the beauty of all the work that is happening within governments, businesses, communities, and how we can be a part of telling that story. So I would say that we've, in response to that, already initiated projects and marketing plans and strategies that very specifically do that. An example of that is a Globe and Mail article that will be coming out on June 21st that we've been cultivating with some of our partners in order, again, to amplify and tell those stories. I think another way that I see that this program is impacting our work is the collaboration between our teams in Canada and internationally. So we have so much learning that we have done in terms of leadership, business development with Indigenous peoples internationally. And we are really now seeing more dialogue and actions come out of that within our staff and volunteers on how to connect those two things. And one great example I can share very quickly is we often work at participants at the Prospector and Developers Association of Canada. And recently, with this past year at our conference, we brought an example of a business work that we work with, a women-owned business in Mongolia who supplies the local mining company with boots. So at PDAC, we facilitated a conversation between this entrepreneur and the Cree Mineral Development Board, who is very interested in a learning exchange about the impact of local business development and community knowledge sharing and those pieces. So we're actively working right now to facilitate that kind of exchange. And I think that has been in part led by the work and the reflection we're doing through the Reconciliation Action Plan. So it's a long answer, but those are a few very tangible initiatives that we're doing right away.
Yeah, that's terrific. So now we've got, I'll read a couple of questions. They're both about sort of education for our advisors. So the first one, congratulations on the plan. It's very inspiring. Any plans for further training, professional development, reading lists, discussion groups, etc., for volunteer advisors, in particular non-Indigenous, to assist with their continued learning, deepen understanding, and alignment with our work with partners? And a similar one, is there a plan to educate advisors on the RAP so we embed this knowledge? And will there be more opportunities to work with Indigenous communities on assignment? Yeah, so over to you, Stacia.
That's a great question. So in the past few years, specifically and very intentionally, we've introduced very targeted training opportunities because we know that we have advisors who are not First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, but see their work with Catalyst Plus as an opportunity to contribute to truth and reconciliation within Canada, and as an actionable way that they might use some of their own skills or experience to contribute to skill development and training on those projects that our Indigenous clients want to work with us on. So some of the ways that we will do that training, have done it. One, we regularly host virtual learning sessions with Indigenous elders, lodge keepers, consultants who work with our volunteers to share information about how to work respectfully with Indigenous peoples. We also have online training that we've always offered to volunteers through Catalyst Plus on intercultural competency, sensitivity, that helps again to develop some of those skills. Another way that we do this work is through peer-to-peer learning. So we know with our volunteers that we have volunteers who are so interested, passionate, curious about the world and the people in it. And so we often facilitate one-on-one conversations with our non-Indigenous volunteers, with folks who have more experience or are Indigenous themselves, so that we can share that learning one-to-one. We also are using our website. So we recently have launched new portals on our website for our work in Canada that goes deeper into, particularly as a beginning, the work we do in Northern Canada. So in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. And these websites are in English and also in Inuktitut. There's resources available there in French as well. Also very detailed information about what you could expect, what common practices are, so that we're using all the platforms and channels we have available to us to share this information and to raise awareness, so that our volunteers can have the information you need to do the work in the right way, and that our clients will receive the mentorship or the work that we do in the right way as well.
Terrific. There's lots of good questions here. It's hard to choose. Okay. So this is an interesting one, sort of about Indigenous representation at all levels of decision making. So let me read you the question. For a successful reconciliation process, how would Catalyst Plus engage in ongoing and meaningful consultation with Indigenous leaders and communities from the outset? There's a few things in here, so Stacia, you can think about this way. How would you ensure Indigenous representations at all levels of decision making and implementation? Building genuine partnerships is based on trust, transparency, and mutual respect. This is key to the reconciliations process. And how would we report? So there's actually a few questions in there. So why don't we leave it at that? Really, it's about, engagement with our clients and partners, and and decision making, and me maybe paraphrasing, is it a needs driven process, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So I would say if I can start with the decision making piece. So to me, this is reflective of our second pillar, which is inclusion, and having hiring practices, procurement practices, having governance practices that are reflective of the people that we work with, and then the Indigenous peoples we work with. So you will see that reflection in the people who make up our board, our Indigenous Services Committee, our Indigenous and Northern Services team, as well as our Catalyst Plus roster of volunteers. So that's one piece. I think the second piece, which is again why we wanted to do a reconciliation action plan, is how do we make that intentional? How do we do that more? How do we do that better? So some of the action items are related to policies that would be reflective of hiring policies, training policies, procurement policies, that embed those into how we recruit, where we recruit, and also for volunteers and staff, and also and recruit contracts for procurement as well. So I think that's the tangible piece in terms of who, and I think in terms of how decisions are made. I think the culture of Catalyst Plus has been to be very consultative, very collaborative. Catalyst Plus has never, my experience, worked as an organization that is that makes decisions without the careful, thoughtful consideration of the people who are most impacted by those decisions. So I think as we have seen an increase in representation across the organization from Indigenous peoples, they will continue to be incredibly important voices in how decisions are made within a practice that already valued the fact that decisions are made through that process. So that's what I would say on that front. I would also add to that as part of our actioning this reconciliation action plan, we will be forming a steering committee. And the steering committee will be made up of leadership, staff, our Indigenous volunteers, could be consultants that we've worked with, Indigenous partners who will be responsible for kind of the stewardship and accountability of our actions for the reconciliation action plan. So from a decision-making and accountability perspective, that's another structure that we will be creating, that we've committed to in order to ensure that. And then the last piece in terms of how you build relationships of trust. In my perspective, how you build relationships of trust is by taking the time to really develop a deep understanding and awareness and respect for who you're working with. I think that's an important part of how you develop trust, and even more important in the work that we're doing with our First Nation, Inuit, and Métis partners in Canada. One of the things that we work very hard to do is and our staff is to really prepare a volunteer who goes on an assignment, because we know that for many of the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities we work with, they've had a long experience of people coming into the community with a short view, not a lot of understanding, very limited, maybe respect for what happens. So we work really hard to make sure that anyone that we're working with through our volunteers or staff have put in that time to, as one partner said, to do your homework. So we make sure we do our homework and we invest heavily in that. I think the other piece about relationships is showing up. And I think you build trust by consistently, meaningfully, authentically showing up. And I think for our organization's culture and the volunteers and staff we work with, that's a priority. It's certainly a priority that we make sure that we use when we're screening for new staff or volunteers. And we make sure that the people that we have representing us share those values. And I think I go back to this slide that Alan had talked about, those values of awareness, inclusivity, and economic independence that underpin what we do. So I think those are kind of high level, some of the ways that I think that we build trust.
Could I just add something as well, just from the board perspective? So, the board has been very seized with representation as well. And so right now we have 3 Indigenous people on our board, which I think is a pretty high level compared to what we've had in the past. And we're still seeking greater representation among Métis and Inuit. But but the board is very seized with both the reconciliation action plan as well as ensuring that we have appropriate representation on the board. So I think that those are also very positive outcomes.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Alan. And I love it. You answered a question before I was able to ask it. So you make my job easy. Thanks, Alan. Okay, so we have a question about Indigenous advisors, sort of recruitment. Then there's another one about Indigenous staff. But before I get there, I love this. We did a blanket exercise in Montreal and Toronto with staff. I think it was last fall. And I think it was so powerful for all of us. And we've got one of the people who facilitated last fall saying that they're willing to do the blanket exercise for us virtually. So that really brings some neat possibilities for our international staff and for our volunteer advisors that live across the country. So thank you for that. That's wonderful. So the question is roughly what percentage of Catalyst Plus advisors are Indigenous, but maybe we can sort of edit that a bit to say, what is our strategy for recruiting more Indigenous people to the roster, or any thoughts, on recruitment in general, right? We recruit for advisors, for clients, for staff. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. So I can answer that. So It's always been a priority for us to recruit and engage more Indigenous advisors. So First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples joining our rosters. So I would say in the last few years, we've really seen a growing number of volunteers who self-identify as First Nations, Inuit, or Métis joining our roster of volunteers. And this has been because of a few things. First, we reach out to clients who we've worked with before to ask them, would you like to volunteer with us? I don't think there's any better in some ways way to do that. We know a lot of people volunteer with Catalyst Plus through word of mouth. So that's one way that we have people interested and joining us in our volunteer roster. I think another important way is we really work to have a strong presence at in-person regional meetings, conferences, where people who might volunteer or be interested in volunteering are. So we participate in many of these meetings and conferences throughout the year across Canada within the economic development, Indigenous economic development sector. So that's another way we do this. We've had a lot of advice from our Indigenous and Northern Services Board Committee as well on how to be effective in recruiting and retaining Indigenous volunteers. So we've launched a few new things online. Our Catalyst Plus Canada Facebook page was a recommendation that we had from previous chair of our Indigenous and Northern Services Committee. So we've done that. And we're also doing more, particularly this year, to again amplify the voices and stories of people's experience volunteering with us. So those are some of the ways. And I think the other piece that we've been very aware of is how do we make Catalyst Plus a place where people want to volunteer? And I think that through the delivery of our reconciliation action plan and the actioning of our items in terms of how to make sure that the culture that we have as an organization, our policies and practices as an organization are reflective of an Indigenous worldview that makes Catalyst Plus a place where everyone feels respected, seen, welcomed, valued, so that we continue to build on what we've noticed the last few years in terms of bringing and working with more Indigenous volunteers.
Thank you, Stacia. There's a few questions about consultation process we went through in developing the Reconciliation Action Plan. I wonder, people, there's literally 3 or 4 questions. One asking, were there any survivors who were consulted? Any people who have been have dealt with intergenerational trauma? Urban versus on reserve. So I don't know if you could just give us a bit of an overview of the consultation process.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that who we spoke with, there were people that we spoke with who were particularly clients. So folks who worked in government or in leadership roles, as business owners who were First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, who we had one-on-one conversations with as we developed the RAP. And as the one who had all those conversations, I can share with you that there were many of those that did include someone sharing their experience in residential school, the impact and where they have felt the impact of intergenerational trauma, how we can acknowledge and work through a reconciliation action plan to honor that experience through the how we do our work and the programs that we have. So again, in my own firsthand experience having these conversations with people both in urban areas and in rural places, as well as in the south and in the north of Canada, those were shared, carefully received, gratefully received, and reflected in the actions that we have taken. So in our reconciliation action plan that we'll be sharing, those people who were comfortable and decided that they wanted to have their names in our acknowledgements were included there.
Terrific. So now we've got a question about our website and languages on our website. It's interesting. We struggle with this worldwide, right? Here in Canada, we, English and French kind of predominate, but there are, as we all know, many, many other languages spoken, and this is the case around the world as well. So many local languages. So the question is, how many Indigenous languages will Catalyst Plus include on its website, in addition to English and French? And I'm wondering, is this a good time for me to ask for a donation to support our expanding the website? Sorry, I'm always have one eye on the budget there. Stacia, any thoughts?
Absolutely. So working within what we have, there's a few ways we do that. The first is on our new Northern websites that again have just been launched in the last 2 weeks. You'll notice that the information there is available in the 4 languages of Nunavut. So this is where we can start. So knowing the importance, the incredible importance of reflective language and using language and having language on our website, this is where we've started. So we've also, through doing this process, developed relationships with Indigenous businesses who do translation so that we're better able to respond and put more and new information onto the site. In terms of the number of languages, we'll do as many as we can. And we will start by doing that in the programs that we have that we're working with now. So that's where we can start and build from. So again, where we're starting and building from as of today is with the languages that we have in Nunavut. The other way that we're reflecting Indigenous languages in our work is through our Facebook page. So our Catalyst Plus Canada Facebook page. If you were to join us there and visit that, you'll notice that our posts are in many different languages. So our posts may be in Cree, they may be in French, they may be in Inuktitut, they may be in English, and that's intentional. So in every post that we do that our staff are sharing, from assignments to conferences that we're at to new programs that we have coming out, it's intentional that we not only share those in English, but that we share those in as many languages as we can. So that's another place to look and see where you can see the answer to your question just about the languages, because we recognize and know how important that is.
Great. Thank you, Stacia. And I have to apologize. These questions have been so fantastic that I've lost track of time. So we're going to have to wrap up the Q&A. Maybe quickly, Stacia, how could people find out more? And maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah.
Absolutely. So our Reconciliation Action Plan and its annual report on our progress will be available on our catalystplus.org website. So this is again where you can find both the Reconciliation Action Plan. You can find out more information about the types of projects and how we do our work. This Northern website that I've been talking about a few times is also available there. We're really excited about that. Also on social media at Catalyst Plus and on Facebook, Catalyst Plus Canada. You can find us there. And then I would also welcome you to reach out to us directly. So you can always reach out. Our information will be made available in the thank you portion, an email that people receive. And information is also available on the website. But if you have a response, a reaction, a question for anything you're hearing today, I would love to hear from you. Our team would love to hear from you and have those conversations that we hope this Reconciliation Action Plan is just the beginning of.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stacia. So if we move to the next slide, just a few closing remarks, and then we'll have our closing prayer. So in adopting this Reconciliation Action Plan, we really commit to taking action that will contribute to real and lasting reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Our RAP is our guide. As we mentioned, it's a concrete, measurable plan that will inform change both within our organization and throughout the broad community in which we interact. And while we view the adoption of this RAP as an important step for our organization as a trustworthy ally to Indigenous peoples, we also believe that it will be a far greater achievement if others in the community join us in adopting reconciliation action plans of their own. Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission was clear. All Canadians, as treaty peoples, share responsibility for establishing and maintaining mutually respectful relationships. So for Canada to move forward, we must all take action to achieve reconciliation. And we do this through the creation of a more equitable society built on respect for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. So we all have a role to play in creating trust and mutual respect. We're committed to doing our part, and we really hope others will join us on our journey. Now, just before we, here we go. Gavin John, a big thank you to Gavin John. He's the one who took and provided all the photos in our plan in this presentation. They're just gorgeous. And I have to highlight, they're real pictures from work our Indigenous and Northern Services program does on the ground. So thank you, Gavin. Thank you to my fellow panelists for today. Thank you to all those who worked on the plan and participated in the consultation, that process of creating the plan. And finally, I want to thank all of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit clients and partners over the years with whom we have walked the path towards reconciliation. We look forward to doing more. We look forward to doing better, and we look forward to going deeper. We're committed and humbled to embark on this new beginning, to walking together in a good way into the future. And now over to Suzanne for our closing prayer.
Merci, merci. Merci, Créateur et les ancêtres, d'avoir joindre notre cercle. Merci for bringing us together, for making this space possible so we can engage in Catalyst Plus's presentation. We are grateful to have had time to visit, to learn, and to contribute. We are grateful for the opportunity to reflect and consider the best way forward. We know from the very thoughtful comments and questions and suggestions in the Q's and A's that interest is very high. We are grateful to you, Creator, for all you give to us and to all you don't. Both are blessings in the learning that we are gaining along our earthly paths. Merci d'être avec nous pour voir où on est et pour nous guider avec nos prochains pas le long de ce chemin. Merci, Creator, for all your blessings, for the strength and determination that you bless the members of this circle, for the respect, acceptance, and honor each has for the role they play in moving the Reconciliation Action Plan from words to action. We offer prayers for the resolution of the conflicts that plague so many nations, their men, their women, their children, their elders. Guide world leaders to find a path to peace. We came into this world with the Great Spirit in our hearts and with a good mind. Guide all of us back to the Great Spirit and the good mind. Keep everyone safe and far from harm. Merci, miigwech. Thank you for all your blessings. See.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we've come to the end of our agenda for today. So I want to say thank you. Merci, miigwech. Really appreciate everyone spending the time with us today. We wish you well and goodbye. Thank you.